That night, when I discovered they were poisoning my mother, I realized I had two choices. I could be the useless daughter who would let my mother die, or I could be the killer who would save her. I chose the second option. The coffee I prepared for them was the last they ever drank. Hello, my dears. What a blessing to have you here with me today. My name is Betty Anderson, but everyone here in Millville, Pennsylvania, knows me as Miss Betty. I'm 78 years old, well-lived. Each wrinkle on my face tells a different story, you know? I was born in Hillsborough, also here in Pennsylvania, but it's been more than 30 years since I've lived in this welcoming little town that embraced me like a daughter. These days, my life is pretty quiet, you know? Every morning I wake up early, even before the sun appears. I like to prepare my hot coffee and reflect on life. My house is simple, but full of love. Each photograph tells a piece of my life, the people who passed through it, the good moments, and the bad ones too, which weren't few. But before I continue, I'd like to make a special request to you who are watching me now. If you're enjoying my story, please leave a like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales, okay? That way you won't miss any of my stories. And tell me in the comments, which little town are you watching me from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with coffee, after lunch, or already in the evening? I always read all the comments, and I'm so happy to know where you're from and when you take a little time out of your day to listen to this grandma's stories. Tell me, okay? Let's create a chain of kindness. Today, I'm going to tell you a story that I've never told anyone. A story about family, about pain, and about how sometimes we need to make choices that nobody should have to make. The world isn't always fair to us, my dears. Sometimes justice needs to be done by our own hands. You'll understand what I mean. My story begins many years ago, when I was still young, full of dreams, and had to watch my mother suddenly fall ill. That's when I discovered that the people who should protect us aren't always the ones who actually do. Sometimes evil is under our own roof, sitting at the table with us, smiling while planning the worst. I was born in a simple house in Hillsborough, there in rural Pennsylvania. It was a small house, but full of life, with a backyard that had a bit of everything, a cherry tree that gave sweet red fruits, a patch of herbs that my mother tended with care, and even a coop with some free-range chickens that gave us fresh eggs every morning. My father, Jack Anderson, worked as a bricklayer. An honest man of few words, but when he spoke, everyone stopped to listen. He had rough, calloused hands from working so much, but with them he built our house, brick by brick. My mother, Odette Wilson Anderson, was a homemaker who cared for us with that silent and strong way of country women. She worked magic in the kitchen with little of everything. Her beans, seasoned with bacon and herbs, were the best in the area. There were 3 of us siblings. Me, the middle child, squeezed between Jim, 2 years older, and Walter, my little brother, 3 years younger. Jim was always Dad's favorite, learned men's things quickly, fishing, fixing things, handling tools. Walter was the joy of the house, cheerful, mischievous, the kind that makes people smile just by looking at him. Our childhood was simple but nice. We played tag in the vacant lot near the house, climbed trees, played marbles. Sometimes, on hot days, we would go to the small creek that ran on the edge of town. It wasn't much, but for us it was quite an adventure. I remember the feeling of cool water on my feet while we tried to catch minnows with our hands. The school was about a 15-minute walk from home. It was a small school with only 4 classrooms, but Miss Zenith was a loving person. She was the one who taught me to like reading. She loaned me books and said I had a good head for studies. I think she was the first person who believed I could be more than just Jack's daughter, the bricklayer. Our lives changed when I was 12 years old. My mother, who had always been healthy as a horse, started complaining of severe headaches. At first, nobody paid much attention. Everyone gets headaches, right? But then, on a Sunday morning, while she was washing the breakfast dishes, I saw her suddenly stop, with a lost look. Her left arm fell limp, and the cup she was holding shattered on the floor. Before I could call for help, she collapsed. It all happened very quickly. "Stroke," said the doctor at the clinic when we arrived with her, terrified. There wasn't much they could do in our small town. They sent her to the hospital in Pittsburgh, but when she came back home, she was no longer the same. She was left with the left side of her body paralyzed, slurred speech, needing help for everything: eating, dressing, bathing. From one day to the next, our house became a different place. That strong and active woman was transformed into a dependent person, bedridden in a small room at the back of the house that my father had hastily fixed up. And I, who had barely left childhood, suddenly found myself responsible for taking care of her. "Now you'll have to take over the house," my father told me, with that hard look that didn't allow for discussion. "Your older brother needs to work with me at the construction site, and the youngest is still too little. The responsibility is yours." So, at 12 years old, my childhood ended. I woke up before everyone else, prepared breakfast, packed lunch for Dad and Jim, fed my mother, changed the sheets when she couldn't control her needs. I ran to school and came back even faster, always afraid that she might need something and I wouldn't be there. The worst wasn't the heavy work, the exhaustion, or having to give up children's games. The worst was seeing my father and older brother changing, day by day. They would come home from work tired, irritated, and take it all out on me. Any little thing was a reason. "The food's cold. The house is a mess. Your mother stinks. You didn't bathe her properly." At first, I cried in hiding. Later, I learned to hold back the tears. Crying didn't help. Nobody was listening. As time passed, the situation at home only got worse. What started as impatience and irritation from my father and older brother soon turned into something much darker and more painful. It was no longer just an occasional shout or complaint about the food. It was something constant, as if I had become the target of all their anger. "Hurry up, you cow! Your mother is waiting!" my father would yell when he saw me sitting for a minute, trying to catch my breath. That was the first time he called me that, and the word cut me like a knife. It didn't take long for my brother Jim to pick up the same habit. "Our cow is tired? Want to lie down in the pasture?" he would mock when he saw me exhausted after a whole day of taking care of the house and my mother. Sometimes he would walk by and push me against the wall or give me a slap on the head like someone hitting a stubborn animal. "Stupid cow, can't even make rice properly." By the time I was 13, I no longer went to school. My father said it was a waste of time, that I had to stay home taking care of my mother. Miss Zenith came to our house once, concerned about my absences, but my father sent her away, saying that our family's business wasn't anyone's problem. "Your mother's like this because of you," my father accused me one night, after drinking almost a whole bottle of whiskey. "If you didn't cause so much trouble, she wouldn't have gotten sick." It was a lie, I knew it was, but I heard it so many times that I began to believe it. Maybe it was my fault. Maybe I deserved to be treated that way. My only consolation was taking care of my mother. Despite everything, I loved her so much. Even though she could no longer speak properly or hug me with both arms, I saw in her eyes a love that no one could take away from us. In the moments when we were alone, I would comb her hair, tell stories, talk about the flowers in the yard, anything to bring a little light to that suffering life. One of the hardest things was giving her the medications. The doctor had prescribed several, for blood pressure, to prevent another stroke, for pain. I kept everything in a shoebox, with the schedules written on a small piece of paper. It was a lot of responsibility for a girl my age, but I made a point of never making a mistake. But over time, I began to notice something strange. No matter how carefully I took care of her, following all the guidelines, my mother seemed to be getting worse instead of better. She was always drowsy, increasingly weak, with dark circles and a pallor that wasn't normal. Sometimes when I gave her water, I noticed that she choked more frequently, as if she was losing even the ability to swallow. "Dad, I think Mom needs to go to the doctor again," I said one afternoon, gathering all the courage I had. He didn't even look up from his newspaper. Doctors are expensive and useless, he answered dryly. She's already condemned anyway, it's just a matter of time. The coldness of that response frightened me. It was as if he was talking about an old pet, not his wife, the mother of his children. It was around this time that my younger brother Walter started to distance himself. At 10 years old, he was still a child, but he already realized that something was very wrong in our house. He started spending more time at the neighbors, coming home only to sleep, as if he was afraid of what he might find. "Why do Dad and Jim call you a cow?" he asked me once, with his eyes full of confusion. I didn't know what to answer. How do you explain to a child something that even I didn't understand? One night, while bathing my mother, I noticed something I had never seen before. Small purple bruises scattered on her arms and legs, as if someone had squeezed her hard. I stayed looking at that, not understanding. She didn't move by herself. There was no way she could have hurt herself like that. "Mom, who did this to you?" I asked, even knowing that she couldn't answer me clearly. To my surprise, she managed to mumble a few words, among them my father's name. Her eyes were full of fear. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I had seen, about my mother's broken words, about my father's increasing coldness. Something was happening in that house, something beyond the name-calling and pushes that I was already used to receiving. The next day, I woke up determined to pay more attention. I started noticing small details, how my father made a point of preparing himself the tea that my mother took every night, how he and Jim whispered when they thought I wasn't listening, how they looked at my mother not with concern but with impatience, as if they were waiting for something. "This old woman never dies," I heard my father say to my brother one afternoon when they thought I was in the backyard. The phrase froze my blood. What were they waiting for? Why did they want her to die? That's when I started spying, pretending to go out to hang clothes when in fact I was listening behind the door, waking up in the middle of the night to see what was happening around the house, observing every gesture, every look exchanged between my father and my brother. The puzzle started to come together when, during one of those night watches, I saw my father enter my mother's room thinking everyone was asleep. Through the crack in the door, I watched as he took a small vial from his pocket and poured a few drops into the glass of water that sat on the bedside table. Then, with a coldness that terrified me, he stood there, staring at her with a smile at the corner of his mouth. That scene changed everything for me. Suddenly, I understood why my mother was getting worse instead of better. I understood the looks, the whispers, the impatience. They weren't just mistreating me. They were doing something much worse to my mother. The question was, why? The answer came the next day, when my father went out and left his office key on the table. We were never allowed to enter there. It was his sacred territory. But at that moment, I needed to know the truth. With my heart beating fast, I entered the room and started going through the drawers. It was in a folder hidden at the bottom of the last drawer that I found what I was looking for. A life insurance policy in my mother's name, with an amount that was a fortune for us. Next to it, several vials of medicines I had never seen before, without label or package insert, hidden in an old toolbox. At that moment, the truth hit me like a punch in the stomach. My father and my brother weren't just waiting for my mother to die. They were helping it to happen, slowly, drop by drop, day after day. And I, without knowing, was being an accomplice, giving her the medicines they switched, the tea they prepared. I went back to her room with a heavy heart, looked at that fragile woman in the bed, and cried like I had never cried before. How could they do this to her? How could they be so cruel, so inhuman? "I'm going to save you, Mom," I whispered, holding her hand. "I swear I'm going to save you." But how? How could a 13-year-old girl fight against two adult men, one of them her own father? How could I prove what they were doing? Who would believe me, the cow, the girl who didn't even go to school anymore? It was on that night that something inside me changed forever. The scared girl gave way to someone stronger, more determined, someone who was no longer afraid, someone who was ready to do whatever was necessary. The days that followed were the most difficult of my life. Now that I knew the truth, every second in that house was like stepping on a minefield. I had to pretend that I didn't know anything, continue taking care of my mother, obey my father and brother's orders, while inside my heart was in pieces. The worst was giving the medicines to my mother. Now I was sure that many of them weren't what they should be. I began to make small sabotages. I would throw some pills away when no one was looking, dilute the night tea with more water than usual, pretend to give the medicines, but hide them under her pillow. In just 1 week, I noticed small improvements. My mother seemed more alert, less drowsy. Her eyes regained some of their shine. But that also meant danger. If my father and brother noticed, they would know something was wrong. The physical abuse got worse during this period. It was as if they felt I was resisting somehow, even without knowing exactly how. The pushes got stronger, the slaps more frequent. Once my brother Jim pushed me so hard against the stove that I burned my arm. I had to bite my lip not to scream in pain. "Pay attention to what you're doing, you useless cow," he yelled, showing no remorse when he saw the red mark forming on my skin. "If the food burns again, you'll get a real beating." The threats became routine. My father would come home, and the first thing he did was look for something to complain about. A corner of dust, a stain on the floor, anything served as a pretext. "A useless girl, that's what you are," he would say, between sips of whiskey. "You can't even take care of your mother properly. She's getting worse every day." I knew it was exactly the opposite. She was improving precisely because I was preventing them from poisoning her, but I couldn't say anything. I had to lower my head and accept the insults, the humiliations, the slaps. Each mark on my body was a reminder of what I was fighting to prevent. My younger brother, Walter, was beginning to understand what was happening. One afternoon, he found me crying, hidden in the backyard, after Jim had pushed me against the wall. "Why don't you run away?" he asked, with his little eyes full of fear and confusion. "And leave Mom alone with them?" "Never," I replied, wiping away the tears. "They're hurting her, Walter. They're giving her bad medicine." He didn't seem to fully understand, but he hugged me tight. It was the only hug I received in those dark days. I asked him not to tell anyone about our conversation. If my father or Jim found out, the consequences would be terrible. One night, while I was washing the dinner dishes, I heard my father and my brother talking in his room. I approached silently, holding my breath to hear better. "She's not dying fast enough," my father complained, his voice slurred by drink. "It's been over a year, and this woman won't give her last breath." "Maybe we need to increase the dose," Jim suggested, with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "Or try another method." "It's too risky," my father replied. "It has to look natural, otherwise the insurance won't pay. But I'm tired of waiting. I want the money soon." "And the cow?" my brother asked, referring to me. I felt a knot in my throat when I heard that hateful nickname. "She's suspicious. The other day I caught her looking at the medicines with a strange face." There was a moment of silence before my father answered. "After her mother dies and we get the money, we'll deal with her too. We'll send her away or put her in some institution. She's too stupid to manage on her own." Those words hit me like a punch in the stomach. It wasn't enough to kill my mother. After that, it would be my turn. They saw me as a problem to be eliminated, an obstacle in their path to the insurance money. I went back to the kitchen with my heart racing, my hands shaking so much that I dropped a glass, which shattered on the floor. The noise attracted my father and brother, who came running to see what had happened. "What was that, you clumsy girl?" my father yelled, grabbing me by the arm with such force that it left marks. "Can't you even hold a glass properly?" "It was an accident," I mumbled, eyes down, trying not to show the terror I felt inside. "It slipped from my hand." "That's why we call you a cow," Jim said, with a malicious little smile. "Cows don't have hands, they have hooves, and hooves don't hold glasses." The two of them laughed as if it was the funniest joke in the world. I stood there, motionless, feeling a hatred growing inside me, a hatred I had never felt before. At that moment, I knew I needed to do something. I could no longer just defend myself or try to protect my mother discreetly. I needed a definitive plan. The following night, I pretended to be asleep when my father went to my mother's room to perform his usual ritual, a few drops in her water glass. But this time, as soon as he left, I silently entered the room and switched the glass for another one I had hidden under the bed, with clean water. I kept the glass with the poisoned water in a safe place, wrapped in a cloth inside an old can at the back of the yard. It would be the proof I needed if I could escape with her to seek help. But who would help? Who could I turn to? The police were in the next town. The neighbors were afraid of my father, known for his violent temper. Miss Zenith hadn't shown up since my father had expelled her from our house. That's when I remembered Nurse Cindy, who had taken care of my mother at the clinic right after the stroke. She had always been kind to us, always asked how we were doing. Maybe she could help, maybe she could examine my mother and confirm my suspicions. The problem was how to get to her without my father or brother finding out. I never left the house alone. Always one of them accompanied me, like a shadow, pretending it was protection, but it was really surveillance. One morning, while serving breakfast, I gathered my courage and risked, "Dad, I think Mom has a wound on her back that won't heal. Shouldn't we take her to the clinic?" He looked at me suspiciously, but I could see that the idea worried him. A wound that wouldn't heal could turn into something more serious, something that would raise suspicions. "I'll take her," he said finally, after thinking for a bit. "You stay and clean the house properly. It's a pigsty." That was my chance. While he was getting ready to take my mother, I ran to her room and whispered in her ear, "Mom, when you get to the clinic, try to make a sign to Nurse Cindy. Try to show that something is wrong. Please." I don't know if she fully understood, but her eyes fixed on mine with an intensity that I hadn't seen in months. It was as if, despite all the mental confusion caused by the stroke and the poisons, she understood that her life depended on that moment. I spent the day in agony, waiting for their return. When they finally arrived, my father seemed irritated, more than usual. "That nosy nurse wants to do some tests on her," he grumbled, dragging my mother's wheelchair inside. "She said her vital signs are weird, that there might be something wrong besides the stroke." My heart leaped. Nurse Cindy had noticed. Maybe there was a chance after all. "When are the tests?" I asked, trying not to seem too anxious. "Next week," he replied, staring at me suspiciously. "Why the interest? Want to get rid of the work of taking care of her?" "No, Dad, of course not," I replied quickly. "I just want her to get better." He mumbled something incomprehensible and went to the kitchen to get a drink. I took the opportunity to look quickly at my mother. Her eyes were different, more alive, as if they had regained a purpose. In an almost imperceptible movement, she moved the fingers of her right hand, the only ones that still responded well, and made a gesture that seemed to say, "Wait." That night, my brother Jim seemed especially agitated. He walked back and forth, whispering with my father, casting glances in my direction. I could feel that something was wrong, very wrong. When I went to give dinner to my mother, he stood at the door, watching me with those cold eyes. "You know, Cal, I think you've been very worried about Mom lately," he said, with a tone that made my skin crawl. "Almost as if you were afraid something would happen to her." I swallowed hard, trying not to show the dread I felt. "I just want to take good care of her," I replied, without looking at him, "like I've always done." "Yeah, but I think you're taking care of her too much, as if you knew something you shouldn't know." He approached, standing just inches from my face. I could smell the cigarette on his breath. "If you know something, little sister, you better keep quiet, understand? Very quiet." The threat was crystal clear. They suspected me. Maybe they had noticed the missing medicines or the subtle improvements in my mother's condition. Either way, I was in danger, and time was running out. That very night, something happened that changed everything. something that transformed my fear into determination, my hesitation into certainty. It was late, maybe close to midnight, when I heard a noise coming from my mother's room. I got up right away, my heart racing, and ran down the dark hallway. The door was ajar, and through the crack I saw a scene I will never forget. My father was leaning over her bed, holding a pillow in his hands. On his face, an expression that mixed anger and determination. My mother, awake, looked at him with eyes wide with pure terror. "I'm tired of waiting," he muttered, his voice slurred from too much drinking. "Tired of spending on you. Today it ends." He started to lower the pillow towards her face. It all happened very quickly. Without thinking, I burst into the room shouting, "Dad, no!" He turned, surprised by my presence. For a second, he seemed confused, as if he didn't understand what I was doing there. Then, the confusion gave way to fury. He dropped the pillow and came towards me. "What are you doing here, you meddler? Go to your room." "You were going to kill her," I accused, unable to control myself. "I saw. You were going to suffocate her with the pillow." His hand hit my face with such force that I fell to the floor. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. "You didn't see anything," he said, pulling me by the hair. "And if you tell anyone this crazy story, nobody will believe you. They'll think it's something from your stupid girl's head." He dragged me down the hall to my room and threw me on the bed. "Stay here and don't come out until tomorrow, and if I hear a peep, you'll regret it." He locked the door from the outside, leaving me in panic. I ran to the window, but it had bars, a protection that he had installed years ago, supposedly to prevent burglars. I spent the night awake, crying softly, desperate for not being able to protect my mother. Every minute I imagined what might be happening in her room. Had he gone back to finish what he started? Was she still alive? When the sun rose, I heard the key turning in the lock. It was my brother Jim. "Dad wants you in the kitchen, now." I got up trembling, with my face still sore from the slap. Before leaving, I asked, "How's Mom?" He shrugged, indifferent. "Alive, unfortunately." That word, unfortunately, was like a knife in my heart. They really wanted her to die. It wasn't my paranoia. It wasn't exaggeration. It was the pure truth. In the kitchen, my father was sitting at the table, drinking black coffee. He seemed calm, as if nothing had happened the night before. "Sit down," he ordered, pointing to the chair in front of him. I obeyed, feeling my legs weaken. "Your mother fell out of bed last night," he said, staring at me firmly. "I was trying to put her back when you came in like a crazy person, yelling nonsense. Understand?" I understood at that moment that he was constructing a new version of the story. A version in which I was the crazy one, the problematic one, the liar. "That's not what I saw," I replied, gathering all the courage I had left. His expression hardened. "You saw what I'm saying you saw. And if anyone asks, that's what you'll tell. Or else." He left the phrase hanging in the air, but the threat was clear. "Your mother's tests were canceled," he continued, drinking his coffee calmly. "I called the clinic and said she's better, that she doesn't need them anymore." My heart sank. It was the only hope I had, that someone from outside, someone with medical authority, would notice what was happening. "And before you get other crazy ideas," he added, "know that I told the people at the clinic that you've been very nervous, imagining things. I said we're worried about your head. They agreed that maybe it would be good for you to consult with a specialist." His plan was perfect. If I tried to denounce him, it would be his word against mine. And he had already planted the seed that I was unstable, imaginative, maybe even crazy. Who would believe a 13-year-old girl against an adult man, respected in the community? That day, they allowed me to see my mother for only a few minutes, always with my father or Jim in the room. She seemed weaker than ever, her eyes half closed, her breathing shallow. When I tried to hold her hand, I noticed new purple marks on her wrist. At night, I heard my father and Jim talking again, this time in the kitchen. "We can't wait any longer," my father was saying. That nurse is already suspicious, and your sister, the cow, almost ruined everything yesterday." "What do you want to do?" Jim asked, his voice low but excited, as if they were planning an adventure and not a murder. "Tomorrow is Saturday. We'll have some whiskey as usual, but this time we'll make it look like your mother had another stroke during the night. Natural, like the doctor said could happen." My blood froze. They were planning to kill her the next night, and I would be next. I spent that night in a state of desperation that I had never felt before. I was trapped in a house with murderers, with no way to ask for help, nowhere to run. I couldn't save my mother. I couldn't save myself. It was in that darkest moment that a memory emerged in my mind. A story that my mother told before she got sick, about how her grandmother, back in rural Pennsylvania, knew the properties of plants. How some cured, others relieved pain, and some could be dangerous if used the wrong way. "Even the prettiest herbs can be poison in the right hands," she would say. Poison. The word echoed in my mind like a bell. I looked out the window, to the backyard, where the herbs that my mother loved so much to take care of grew. Some still survived, even with my clumsy care. Among them, some that she had taught me to never touch, never use in food. A terrible idea began to form in my head. An idea that went against everything I believed in, everything my mother taught me about respect for life. But what else could I do? They were going to kill her. After that, it would be my turn. No one would help us. No one would believe me. My head spun with contradictory thoughts. Part of me screamed that it was wrong, that I couldn't lower myself to their level. Another part, more pragmatic, more desperate, insisted that it was the only way out. "It's self-defense," I whispered to myself, tears streaming down my face. "It's to save Mom, to save myself." I closed my eyes and saw my mother's face before the stroke, smiling, full of life, full of love. I remembered the stories she told, the songs she sang to help me sleep. I remembered how she always said I was special, that I was strong, that one day I would do important things. I opened my eyes with a new resolution. I wouldn't let them kill her like an animal. I wouldn't let them treat me like trash afterwards. If they wanted to use poison, I would show them what real poison was. The next morning, I got up early, before everyone else. I went to the backyard and with trembling hands picked some leaves from that plant that my mother always warned to avoid. Not many, just enough. I kept them wrapped in a piece of cloth, hidden in the pocket of my apron. During the day, I acted normally, or as normally as possible under the circumstances. I took care of my mother, cleaned the house, prepared the meals. My father and Jim seemed in a good mood, exchanging complicit looks when they thought I wasn't watching. At night, as they always did on Saturdays, they sat on the porch with a bottle of whiskey, talking loudly, laughing at crude jokes. Once in a while, one of them would come in to check if I was taking care of my mother properly. "I'll make some strong coffee for you," I offered when the bottle was half empty. "It's getting cold. It'll do you good." My father nodded, not paying much attention to me. Jim just mumbled something that I interpreted as agreement. In the kitchen, with hands shaking so much I could barely hold the kettle, I prepared the strongest coffee I had ever made. When the water boiled and the coffee was ready, I took the leaves from my pocket. They were dry now, easier to crumble. I put them at the bottom of their cups and covered them with the dark coffee. The strong smell of the drink would mask any other odor. For a moment, I hesitated. What I was about to do would change everything forever. There was no going back. Once done, I would carry this for the rest of my life. But then I heard their laughter on the porch, that cruel laughter I knew so well, and I remembered the pillow in my father's hands, the purple marks on my mother's body, the threats, the insults, the humiliations. I remembered that, for them, we weren't people. We were just obstacles in the way to the insurance money. "Dad, Jim, the coffee's ready," I called, bringing the cups to the porch. They took the cups without even looking at me, still involved in their conversation about how much money they would have when it was all over. I turned my back and went inside, to my mother's room. I sat next to her, holding her fragile hand between mine. She was sleeping, or seemed to be sleeping, her breathing irregular, her face thin and pale. I stayed there, waiting, praying for forgiveness for what I had done, for what was to come. I don't know how much time passed until I heard the first noise, something falling, breaking. Then came a muffled scream, followed by another louder one. I squeezed my mother's hand harder. "Everything's going to be okay now," I whispered, although I wasn't sure if she could hear me. "No one is going to hurt you anymore. I promise." The minutes that followed are like a blur in my memory. I heard more noises on the porch, cups breaking, chairs falling, confused voices shouting. Then, silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that seemed to swallow the whole house. I stayed paralyzed next to my mother's bed, unable to move, to check what had happened out there. Part of me knew, but another part didn't want to confirm. As if, as long as I didn't see, I could pretend nothing had happened. It was my mother who brought me back to reality. Her eyes opened and fixed on mine with a lucidity that I hadn't seen in a long time. Her hand squeezed mine lightly. "Daughter," she whispered, her voice hoarse and weak but clear. "What did you do?" Those 3 words hit me like lightning. She knew. Somehow, even in her debilitated state, she knew what I had done. "I saved us, Mom," I replied, tears streaming down my face. "They were going to kill you tonight. After that, it would be me." She closed her eyes for a moment, as if absorbing the weight of those words. When she opened them again, there was something different in them. Not disapproval as I feared, but an infinite sadness. "Police," she managed to say. "Call police." I knew she was right. There was no way to hide what had happened. Sooner or later, someone would find out. Better that it be on our terms, with our version of the story. I got up on shaky legs and went to the phone in the living room. We had never used it to call the police before. Actually, we rarely used the phone. It was more of a show-off item for my father than a necessity. With trembling fingers, I dialed the number of the sheriff's office in the next town. When a male voice answered, the words came out in a cascade. "Please, I need help. I think my father and my brother are dead." The voice on the other end became alert. "Where are you? What happened?" I gave our address and, after a moment of hesitation, added, "They were poisoning my mother. For months, to get the insurance money. I put something in their coffee. Please come quickly." I hung up and went back to my mother's room, feeling as if I was floating outside my body. It was as if that girl on the phone was someone else, not me. As if all of this was happening to another family, in another house. "They're already coming, Mom," I said, going back to hold her hand. "Everything's going to be okay." But would it be? I had just confessed to a crime. No matter the circumstances, no matter why I had done it, there were 2 dead people on the porch of our house, and I was responsible. Time seemed to drag on as we waited. At some point, my younger brother, Walter, appeared at the door of the room, his eyes wide with fear. "What happened?" he asked, his voice trembling. "Dad and Jim are strange. They're not moving." I extended my hand to him, and he ran into my arms. "Everything's going to be all right," I repeated, although I wasn't sure if it was true. "The police are coming. They'll help." I don't know how long we stayed like that, me, my mother, and Walter, when we heard the sirens in the distance. Soon the house was full of police officers and paramedics. Some went straight to the porch, others came to check on my mother. They separated me from my brother, taking each of us to a different corner to ask questions. The police officer who talked to me was a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes. He introduced himself as Sheriff Ignazio. "Tell me what happened here, girl," he asked, sitting next to me in the kitchen. "From the beginning." And so I did. I told him everything. My mother's stroke, the mistreatment, the suspicions of poisoning, the discovery of the insurance policy, my father's attempt to suffocate her with the pillow, their plan for that night, and finally, what I had done. I know I did something terrible, I concluded, looking at my trembling hands. I know I'm going to jail, but I had to save my mother. There was no one else to help. The sheriff was silent for a long moment, watching me. I want you to show me where you found the insurance policy and the medicines, he finally said. I took him to my father's office, pointed to the drawer where I had found the documents. To my surprise, everything was still there. The policy, the suspicious vials, even my father's notes about dosages. And you say you saved a sample of the poisoned water that your father gave your mother? He asked. I nodded and took him to the back of the yard, where I dug up the can with the carefully wrapped glass. The sheriff called another officer, who put the glass in a plastic bag, labeled it, and stored it away. When we got back inside, the paramedics were already taking my mother on a stretcher. I ran to her, in panic. Where are they taking her? I asked, grabbing her hand. To the hospital in Pittsburgh, replied one of the paramedics. She needs urgent care. My mother squeezed my hand with surprising strength. It's going to be okay, she managed to say, her eyes fixed on mine. Then she looked at the sheriff, who was by my side. She saved my life. The words came out with difficulty, but they were clear enough. The sheriff nodded gravely. We're going to take care of her, ma'am. You can rest easy. When they took my mother away, I felt as if they were ripping out a piece of me. Walter was in the corner of the living room, being comforted by a female police officer. He looked so small, so lost. And my brother? I asked the sheriff. What's going to happen to him? We're going to find relatives who can stay with him for now, he replied. Do you have any uncles, aunts, grandparents? I thought of my mother's family, whom we hadn't seen in years because my father wouldn't allow it. Mom has a sister in Erie, Aunt Ivy. She liked us a lot. The sheriff wrote down the name and promised they would try to locate her. Then came the part I feared most. Betty, said the sheriff, using my name for the first time, you need to come with us to the station. I nodded, already expecting this. I was ready to face the consequences of what I had done. Before leaving, I asked to say goodbye to my brother. They're going to take you to Aunt Ivy's house, I explained, hugging him tight. She's good. She'll take good care of you. And you? And Mom? He asked, his eyes full of tears. Mom is going to the hospital to get better. And I'll have to go with the police for a while. Will you come back? He insisted, holding my hand tightly. I didn't have the courage to tell the truth, that I probably wouldn't come back, at least not for many years. One day, I replied, kissing his forehead. Take care of Mom for me, okay? At the police station, I spent hours answering questions, repeating my story several times to different officers. Then, I was taken to a small room with a bed where I spent the night. The next morning, Sheriff Ignacio came back with news. Your mother is stable at the hospital, he informed. The doctors did tests and found high doses of medications in her blood, some that shouldn't even be there. This confirms your story about the poisoning. I felt an immense relief to know that my mother was alive and being well cared for. And there's more, he continued. We found your brother Jim's diary. He wrote about the plans to kill your mother, about how you two were a burden. It's quite disturbing. The sheriff seemed genuinely shaken by what he had read. We located your Aunt Ivy, he added. She's already come to pick up your brother Walter and said she'll accompany your mother at the hospital. Finally, some good news. They would be together, at least. And what about me? I asked, already knowing the answer. The sheriff sighed deeply. It's complicated, Betty. You committed a serious crime, there's no denying that. But the circumstances are exceptional. He explained to me that, because I was a minor, I wouldn't be tried as an adult. I would be referred to a juvenile judge who would decide my fate. I could be placed in a juvenile detention facility or, if I was lucky, placed under some kind of supervised release. "I'll speak to the judge personally," the sheriff promised. "I'll tell him what I saw in that house, what we discovered about your father and your brother. I can't promise anything, but I think he'll take all of this into account." In the weeks that followed, I stayed in a juvenile facility, waiting for the judge's decision. My Aunt Ivy came to visit me a few times, bringing news of my mother. She was slowly getting better after they stopped giving her the wrong medicines. She could already speak better, and the doctors were optimistic about her recovery. Walter also came with my aunt. He seemed happy, or at least happier than I had ever seen him in our house. Aunt Ivy treated him with affection, and he was already enrolled in a new school in Erie. When the day of the hearing with the judge finally arrived, I was resigned to accept any punishment. I had made a terrible choice, but I still believed it was the only one I had under the circumstances. To my surprise, the judge, a white-haired man with a severe but not unkind expression, listened to my case very carefully. Sheriff Ignacio testified on my behalf, describing in detail what he had found in the house, my father and brother's plans, the evidence of abuse and poisoning. My mother, still weak but able to speak, also testified via video conference from the hospital. She confirmed the years of abuse she had suffered at the hands of my father, how he had treated her as an object, not as a wife. And most importantly, she confirmed that, after the stroke, she realized she was being poisoned, but had no strength to ask for help. "My daughter saved my life," she said, her voice choked. "She did what I couldn't do for myself." At the end of the hearing, the judge retired to deliberate. When he returned, his decision caught me completely by surprise. "Betty Anderson," he began, "what you did was extremely serious. Taking a life, let alone two, is an act that can never be taken lightly." I lowered my head, preparing for the worst. "However," he continued, "after analyzing all the evidence, the medical reports, the testimonies, including that of Sheriff Ignacio and your mother, I understand that you were in a situation of imminent danger. You and your mother were under constant threat, and there was a concrete plan to kill her that night." He paused, looking directly at me. "Considering all these factors, I will not order your internment in a juvenile detention facility. Instead, you will be under supervised release for 3 years with mandatory psychological counseling and regular visits to a social worker." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I looked at Sheriff Ignacio, who was smiling discreetly. "You will be able to live with your Aunt Ivy in Erie, along with your mother when she is discharged from the hospital, and your brother Walter," continued the judge. "But you must understand that what you did was wrong, regardless of the circumstances. Justice should not be taken into one's own hands, even in desperate situations." "I understand, Your Honor," I replied, my voice choked with emotion, "and I accept any condition." "There's one more thing," he added. "When your mother is fully recovered, the insurance policy will be paid to her, since she was the legal beneficiary. Your father had tried to change this, but didn't have time to complete the process." That news left me stunned. The money that my father and brother had been willing to kill for would now help my mother restart her life. There was a poetic justice in that which didn't go unnoticed. That same day, I left the facility with my Aunt Ivy. We went straight to the hospital to see my mother, who cried when she hugged me. She was different, still weak, still with after effects of the stroke, but there was a light in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. A light of someone who was finally free. My mother's recovery was slow but steady. After 3 months in the hospital, she finally was discharged and came to live with us at Aunt Ivy's house in Erie. With the insurance money, we bought a small but comfortable house in Millville, a quiet little town in Pennsylvania where nobody knew us, where we could start over without the weight of the past haunting us. The 3 years of supervised release were difficult. I had frequent nightmares. I blamed myself for what I had done, no matter how much the psychologist who accompanied me tried to show me that I had acted in a moment of extreme desperation. But little by little, with the support of my mother, Walter, and Aunt Ivy, I began to understand that, despite the terrible act I had committed, I wasn't a terrible person. You made an impossible choice in an impossible situation, the psychologist would say. Now you need to learn to live with it and to forgive yourself. And that's what I tried to do, day after day, year after year. Go back to studying, take care of my mother, see my brother grow up happy and healthy. Build a life that honored the second chance I received. Today, more than 60 years after those terrible days, I live a quiet life here in Millville. I never left this little town since we moved here. I found a place where I could heal my wounds, where I could rebuild myself as a person. My mother lived 10 more years after I saved her from that hell. She never fully recovered from the stroke. She always needed a cane to walk and had difficulties speaking when she was tired. But they were 10 years of peace, of love, of true affection. She was able to see Walter graduate from high school, see me start nursing school. I think she departed in peace, knowing that her children were safe, that they had a future ahead of them. Aunt Ivy stayed with us until the end. Even after we bought our own house here in Millville, she never wanted to go back to Erie. "My place is with you," she would say, with that sweet smile that was her trademark. It was she who taught me to forgive, not my father or my brother, but myself. It was she who helped me understand that a decision made in desperation does not define who we are for the rest of our lives. My brother Walter grew up strong and good, without the shadows of the past haunting him like they did me. He graduated in engineering, married a lovely woman named Clara, and gave me 3 nephews who are the light of my life, Gabriel, Rachel, and Matthew. Today he lives in Philadelphia, but comes to visit me regularly, especially on holidays and birthdays. As for me, I followed the path of nursing. Perhaps it was a form of compensation, of trying to save other lives after having taken 2. I worked more than 30 years in the small hospital in Millville, caring mainly for the elderly and patients with chronic diseases, those who, like my mother, needed constant care and special attention. I got married at 28 to August, a gentle and patient man I met during my internship at the hospital. He knew my story. I told him before accepting his proposal, thinking he would run away when he knew about my past. But he just held my hands and said, "It's not our worst moment that defines who we are, but how we choose to live after it." We had 2 children, Mary and Henry. I raised them with all the love and care I could give, always conscious of never reproducing the abusive patterns I saw in my childhood. August was an exemplary father, the kind of man who played on the floor with the children, who never raised his voice, who respected everyone around him. I lost my August 12 years ago, victim of a massive heart attack. It was an immense pain, but different from the one I felt in adolescence. This was a clean pain, without the poison of hatred or fear. Just longing, just love. Today, I live alone in this simple little house, but I never feel lonely. My children live nearby, Mary right here in Millville, and Henry in Harrisburg, just a 2-hour drive away. I have 5 grandchildren who fill my life with joy when they come to visit. The oldest, Philip, is already in college. The youngest, Julia, is only 8 years old and loves it when I make pancakes for her on Sunday afternoons. My days are peaceful, filled with small activities that give me pleasure. I wake up early, have my coffee looking at the garden that I cultivate with so much care. I have a cherry tree that bears fruit twice a year. The grandkids love to climb it to pick the sweet cherries. I also have rose bushes that I got from my neighbor Mrs. Cleo, and an herb garden that I use to make teas and season food. 3 times a week, I go to the community center in town to participate in a crafts group. I do crochet, knitting, embroidery, things I never had time or opportunity to learn when I was young. My patchwork quilts are famous in this region. I've made more than 50, most donated to nursing homes and orphanages. On Wednesdays, I participate in a project at the local elementary school where I tell stories to the children. Stories of overcoming, of courage, of kindness, values that I believe are fundamental to forming good human beings. The little ones call me Grandma Betty and run to hug me when I arrive. It's one of the greatest joys of my week. On Sundays, I go to church in the morning. I'm not overly religious, but I find comfort in faith, in the idea that there is a greater purpose for everything, even for suffering. After the service, I usually have my children and grandchildren over for a family lunch. The house gets noisy, full of laughter and conversations, exactly how a house should be. I never spoke again about what happened that Saturday night, so many years ago. My children know, of course. I thought they had the right to know the truth about their past. But to the rest of the world, I'm just Miss Betty, the retired nurse who does volunteer work and adores her grandchildren. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, looking at the stars from my porch, I think about how strange life is, how a single moment can change everything forever. I think about what would have happened if I hadn't discovered my father's plan, if I hadn't made that desperate decision. Probably neither my mother nor I would be alive. Walter would have grown up alone, perhaps becoming like his father and brother. I'm not proud of what I did. I never will be. Taking a life is a terrible thing, no matter the circumstances. But I don't torture myself anymore like before. I've learned to live with my past, to accept that at that moment, with the knowledge and resources I had, I did what I believed was the only option to save my mother and myself. Sheriff Ignazio, who was so important in those difficult days, became a friend over the years. He retired from the police and also came to live in Millville, saying he wanted peace after so many years seeing the worst of humanity. Until his death, 5 years ago, we used to have coffee together on Mondays. He always said that my case made him rethink many things about justice and compassion. Today, looking back, I see that my life has been a long journey of redemption. Each patient I cared for in the hospital, each child I educated, each act of kindness I practiced, everything was part of my attempt to balance the scales, to give back to the world more than I took from it. I don't know if I succeeded. I don't know if it's possible. But I know that I tried every day to be better than I was the day before. And maybe, in the end, that's all any of us can do. My dear viewers, after sharing this difficult, painful story, I want to leave some words from the bottom of my heart for you. Life sometimes puts us in situations where there are no perfect choices, where every path seems darker than the other. In those moments, we need to find within ourselves a strength we didn't even know we had. A strength that comes not from hatred, not from anger, but from love for ourselves and for those who depend on us. What I've learned in my almost 80 years of life is that we're never completely without hope. Even in the darkest nights, even when it seems that everyone has turned their back, there's always a possibility of change, of transformation, of starting over. If you're going through situations of abuse, if someone is hurting you, know that you're not alone. Today, there are many paths to help that I didn't have in my time. There are hotlines for reporting, there are shelters, there are professionals trained to help. Never believe when they tell you that you deserve suffering, that you're less than others, that you have no value. These are the lies that abusers tell to maintain their power over us. You have value, you deserve respect, you deserve to be loved. Often, we feel trapped in impossible situations. It seems there's no way out, that we'll suffer forever. But I'm here, on the other side of this journey, to tell you that's not true. There's always a different tomorrow. There's always a possibility of healing. When I look back and see that 13-year-old girl, desperate, not knowing where to run, I feel immense compassion. I wish I could hug her and tell her that, despite everything, she's going to survive. More than survive. She'll build a good life, a loving family. She'll help other people. Fear can paralyze us, but it can also give us wings when we need to flee from danger. Pain can destroy us, but it can also teach us about compassion and empathy. Hatred can consume our soul, but forgiveness, especially self-forgiveness, can free it. You're not defined by your worst moments, by your most desperate decisions. You're defined by how you choose to live after them, by how you choose to rebuild, reinterpret, be reborn. In my long journey, I've learned that carrying guilt doesn't help anyone. Not ourselves, not those we've hurt, not those we love. What helps is transforming that guilt into positive action, into care, into service to others. I've also learned that silence is the greatest ally of violence. When we keep quiet, when we hide, when we pretend everything is okay when it's not, we give more power to abuse. That's why I speak today. That's why I share my story, so that other people know they're not alone, that there's a path beyond the darkness. Each life that touches ours has a purpose. Every person who crossed my path, even those who hurt me, taught me something important, and I choose to keep the lessons, not the resentment. If there's one thing time has taught me, it's that we're stronger than we imagine. Within each of us exists a capacity to survive, to adapt, to rebuild that is almost miraculous. My dear friends who watched until here, I ask you to help me spread this message of hope. If you liked my testimony, please leave your like and subscribe to Grandparents' Tales. It's very important so that stories like mine can reach more people who need to hear that there is life beyond pain, that there is healing, that there is redemption. And leave in the comments the word survivor, so I know you watched until the end, that you heard my complete story. Do it now. Don't wait another minute. Each person you help to know this story may be someone who desperately needs hope at this moment. Always remember, no matter how deep the darkness, there's always a light at the end. Sometimes that light is ourselves, shining from the inside out, illuminating our own path when no one else can do it. May God bless each one of you, and may you never, ever lose faith in the possibility of better days. That faith kept me alive in my darkest moments, and it can do the same for you. He was my son, my own flesh and blood. But when I discovered that hidden hole in the wall between his room and my 8-year-old granddaughter's, I understood that monsters can sometimes come from our own womb. That night, my old trembling hands became the instrument of justice that no one else would deliver. Good morning, my dear viewers. My name is Alice Teresa Johnson. I'm 76 years old, born in Pikeville, Kentucky, but today I live here in Oceanside, California. I live in a different kind of place, you know? A place where the walls are cold and the windows have bars. The people here call me Miss Alice, and the staff treat me with a certain respect. They say I'm the calmest elderly lady in this special facility for seniors who have committed crimes. From my window, I can see a small patch of the ocean. It's so beautiful when the sun hits the water in the early morning, like God himself is spreading liquid gold across the sea. Sometimes I see children playing on the beach in the distance, and my heart aches with longing for my granddaughter. If you enjoyed the beginning of this story, please click that like button and subscribe to the Grandparents' Tales channel. There are many stories like mine out there, stories of people who did what needed to be done when no one else would. And do you know why? Because sometimes true love isn't just made of hugs and kisses. Sometimes true love has claws and teeth to protect those who need protection. And you, my dear viewers watching now, tell me in the comments, which town are you watching from? And what time of day did you find this video? Early morning with your coffee after lunch, or already at night wrapped in a blanket? I always like to know who you are on the other side, listening to this story that, despite how painful it is to the soul, needs to be told. I'll tell you how a white-haired grandmother with wrinkled hands, whom everyone called senile old lady, ended up in this place. How I discovered that sometimes evil doesn't come from strangers. It comes from our own blood, and how a simple hole in the wall revealed the hell that was living under my own roof without me even imagining. I was born in a simple cabin with a dirt floor and a thatched roof on the outskirts of Pikeville. My father, John Johnson, worked in the coal mines, a strong and quiet man who came home when the sun was already setting, his naturally dark skin made even darker by work under the harsh Appalachian sun. My mother, Grace, was a baker who made the best pies and jam preserves in the region. When there was a church social or 4th of July celebration, Everyone ordered Grace's preserves. We were 5 siblings: me, the youngest, my brothers Theodore, Arthur, and Oliver, and my sister Norma. Our house had only 2 rooms, the kitchen and one large room where we all slept on straw mats. We didn't have an indoor bathroom. It was a small outhouse near the barn where my father kept the 2 dairy cows he cared for with such affection. Life was hard, but it had its own sweetness in that simplicity. We woke up with the rooster's crow even before the sun appeared. While my mother lit the wood stove and prepared coffee, we children would fetch water from the well. It was almost a 15-minute walk, carrying buckets that felt heavier with each step on the way back. Play was what saved our souls. We played ring around the rosy, hide and seek between the apple and cherry trees. We made corn husk dolls with straw hair, wooden cars with wheels made from empty spools. My brother Theodore was the most skillful, making toys that other children from the area would come to admire. At school, which was more than an hour's walk away, we studied in a single room with children of all ages. The teacher, Miss Zena, was as rigid as an oak trunk, but had a special way of teaching that made letters dance before our eyes. She was the one who saw that I had a facility with words and numbers, and convinced my father to let me continue studying when I turned 10, an age when many girls already stopped to help at home. My friends from that time. Dorothy, who lived on the neighboring farm and shared her secrets and girlhood dreams with me. Elmer, the storekeeper's son, who always saved a piece of rock candy for me when I went shopping for my mother. And Harriet, who had the most beautiful hair in the region, long down to her waist, black as a moonless night. Life in Pikeville in the 1950s was marked by harvest time, church gatherings, and the stories that elders told around the fire on cold nights. We had no electricity, so when the sun went down, darkness was broken only by kerosene lamps and the kitchen stove fire. The sky, the sky of that countryside, was a spectacle of stars that today, with so much light in the cities, we can hardly imagine. Sundays were special days. We wore our least worn clothes and went to the little Baptist church in the center of town. After the service, it was market day, where producers from the region sold everything: vegetables, fruits, cheeses, preserves, smoked meats, crafts. My mother set up her little stall of preserves, and I stood beside her, helping to sell. It was there that I learned to do mental arithmetic, to talk with customers, to understand the value of honest work. But not everything was sweet in my childhood. When I was 8, a terrible drought punished our region. The streams dried up, the well on our property began to yield muddy water, the crops died. My father had to go work even farther away, staying weeks without coming home. We went hungry that year, eating only what we could harvest from the yard. Some withered sweet potatoes, eggs from the chickens that survived, and sometimes a little cornmeal that some sympathetic neighbor would share. It was during this time that I first realized how cruel life can be. I saw children younger than me die from diseases that today would be easily treated. I saw entire families abandon their lands, departing on foot with their few bundles of clothes, seeking a better life elsewhere. I saw the desperation in the adults' eyes, something no child should witness. My father returned different from that time away, more quiet, his eyes always downcast, as if carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. He began to drink the moonshine that he used to taste only at celebrations. He wasn't violent, thank God, but he closed himself in a silence so dense that it seemed like a wall between him and the rest of the family. It was my mother who held things together during that time. With a strength that I only understood when I became a mother myself, she multiplied what little we had. She made preserves with fruits she managed to collect in the wild, sold them door to door in town, washed clothes for wealthier families, sewed, cooked for parties. Her hands, already rough, became full of calluses and cracks that bled in the dry weather. When I turned 12, an important change happened in our family. My oldest brother, Theodore, got a job at a textile factory in Louisville. He was the first to leave the nest, carrying with him the promise to send money every month to help the family. The farewell was painful. My mother cried, hugging him for so long I thought she would never let him go. But he had to leave, and he did. The money Theodore sent changed our situation. Gradually, we were able to improve the house, buy some cattle, plant a larger field. And it was with this money that my father finally bought the family's first radio, a device that seemed magical to me. The voices and music that came out of that wooden box transported me to a world I didn't even know existed. In those final days of my childhood, I was already dreaming of horizons beyond the hills of Pikeville. I heard on the radio stories of big cities, of opportunities, of education. I wanted to be a teacher, perhaps, like Miss Zena, or a nurse, to care for sick people like those I had seen suffering during the drought. I didn't yet know the path life was preparing for me, but I already felt in my chest that restlessness, that call to something beyond what my eyes could see in the red lands of the Kentucky hills. When I turned 13, life began to change in a way I didn't expect. My sister Norma married a young man from Prestonsburg, the neighboring town, and went to live there. That same year, my father fell ill with pneumonia and, without the resources we have today, departed this world in less than 2 weeks. It was a shock for all of us, especially for my mother, who found herself a widow with 4 children to raise. It was during this time that I met Ignatius, the son of the store owner where we bought supplies. He was 5 years older than me, had a gentle way of speaking, and dark eyes that seemed to read my soul. He began to accompany me on the way to school, carried my books, secretly gave me sugar candies when no one was looking. I thought that was love, in my understanding as a girl. At 15, I was no longer a child. My body had changed, and the looks men gave me had changed too. My mother, concerned, was always saying, "Alice, a proper girl doesn't talk to just anyone, doesn't walk around alone." But Ignatius wasn't just anyone to me. He was my first love, the one that makes your heart beat faster, your hands sweat, your voice falter. When I turned 16, Ignatius asked for my hand in marriage. My mother thought it was too early. She wanted me to at least finish elementary school. But the financial situation at home was difficult, even with the help of the money Theodore sent from Louisville. A dowry, even a small one, and one less mouth to feed made a difference. We married in a simple ceremony at the Baptist church. My dress was borrowed from a cousin, the flowers were from the yard, the celebration was a lunch in the yard of my mother's house. I remember the smell of fried chicken, the white rice garnished with bits of carrot, the boiled sweet potatoes, the apple cider. Everything simple, but made with so much love that I can still taste it when I close my eyes. I went to live with Ignatius in a small house on the back of his parents' property. In the first few months, everything was roses. He worked at his father's store. I took care of the house and planted a small garden in the back. At night we talked about the future, about the children we would have, about a better life we would build together. But soon I realized that Ignatius had a side I didn't know. It started with small impatiences. Then came the constant criticisms of my way of cooking, of arranging the house, of dressing. "Can't you do anything right, Alice? You can't even cook beans without burning them?" The words hurt more than slaps. Over time, the situation worsened. Ignatius began to drink like my father in his last years. But unlike my father, who closed himself in a sad silence, Ignatius became aggressive. The first time he raised his hand to me was when I burned his favorite shirt while ironing. The iron was too hot and made a hole in the fabric. He came home from work, saw the shirt, and his face transformed into a mask of anger I never forgot. "You useless woman! You can't even do this right!" And came the slap, so strong that I fell sitting on the dirt floor of the kitchen. I cried all night, hidden under the blanket so he wouldn't hear. The next day, he acted as if nothing had happened. He even brought me a piece of rock candy, said he loved me. And I, foolish as I was, believed it had been just that one time. But it wasn't. The aggressions became part of our routine. A poorly washed dish, a meal without salt, a misplaced word. Anything was a reason. I learned to shrink myself, to stay quiet, to predict what might displease him. I lived walking on eggshells, as the older women used to say. At 18, I became pregnant with my first child. I thought the arrival of a baby would change Ignatius, that he would become the gentle man I had met. During the pregnancy, things really improved. He was proud to see my belly grow, made plans for the child, even bought a second-hand crib that he sanded and painted himself. When Oswald was born in 1967, it was one of the happiest days of my life. A strong, rosy-cheeked boy with his father's eyes. Ignatius seemed like a different man in those first few months. He would come home from work and go straight to see his son, pick him up, sing lullabies with his deep, off-key voice, which to me at that moment was the most beautiful in the world. But peace lasted only a short time. The baby's crying at night irritated Ignatius. "Make that child shut up, Alice. How is a man supposed to work without proper sleep?" I spent nights awake, rocking Oswald in my arms, breastfeeding, changing cloth diapers that I washed daily in the washtub out back. When Oswald was almost 2, Ignatius lost his job at his father's store. The old man fell ill and had to sell the establishment. The new owner brought his own family to work. Ignatius was left without occupation, spending his days at home, drinking or wandering around town looking for odd jobs that rarely appeared. It was during this time that things really worsened. The short money, Ignatius's frustration, the child's crying. Everything became fuel for his anger. The shouting and slaps became punches and kicks. I learned to defend myself as best I could, to protect my son above all. I hid the bruises with long clothes even in the heat of summer, invented stories about falls and accidents when someone asked. One night, when Oswald was 3, Ignatius came home drunker than normal. I had served dinner, a potato soup with a piece of bacon, what I managed to make with the little we had in the pantry. He threw the plate against the wall. "This is pig food, not man's food," he shouted, advancing toward me with clenched fists. Oswald, who was playing in the corner of the kitchen with some empty spools, began to cry in fear. Ignatius turned to him. "Shut up, boy. Isn't your worthless mother enough?" It was the first time he directed his anger at the boy. Something inside me awakened, an instinct I didn't know existed. I placed myself between Ignatius and my son. "You don't touch him," I said, with a firmness that surprised us both. Ignatius hesitated for a moment, then laughed, a cold laugh that sent chills down to my soul. "Look at that. The hen became a lioness. Let's see for how long." That night, after Ignatius fell asleep, I made a decision. I couldn't continue like this. My son wouldn't grow up watching his mother being beaten, nor running the risk of suffering the same. I gathered our few clothes in a burlap sack, took the savings I hid inside the mattress, some coins and bills I saved from the change from groceries, and before dawn, I picked up Oswald in my arms and left that house never to return. I went to the Pikeville bus station. With the money I had, I could only buy a ticket to Louisville. I knew my brother Theodore lived there. I didn't have his address, but I hoped to find him, that he would help us. The trip was long and uncomfortable. Oswald, not understanding what was happening, cried and asked for his father. "We're going to see Uncle Theodore, son. It'll be good, you'll see," I said, trying to convince myself more than him. We arrived in Louisville at dusk. The big city scared me. So many lights, so many cars, so many hurried people. I, a country girl, had never seen anything like it. I stood at the bus station with Oswald in my arms and the sack of clothes beside me, not knowing where to go. That's when an older gentleman noticed my lost expression. He was the owner of a boarding house nearby. "Miss, do you need help?" he asked, with a kind look that reminded me of my father. I explained that I was looking for my brother, but didn't know where to find him, only that he worked at a textile factory. "I know which one," he said. "It's in the industrial district, but it's closed today. Why don't you stay at the boarding house tonight? Tomorrow I'll take you there." I was suspicious at first. Life had already taught me not to trust easily. But something in that man's eyes, whom I later discovered was named Gerald, told me he was sincere. And anyway, I had nowhere else to go. I spent that night at the boarding house, sharing a small bed with Oswald. I couldn't sleep properly, thinking about what Ignatius would do when he discovered we had fled, if he would come after us, if I would find Theodore the next day. Fear and uncertainty were like a knot in my chest, tightening, making even breathing difficult. The next day, Mr. Gerald kept his promise. He took me to the textile factory. At the gate, I asked for Theodore Johnson. The guard said yes, he worked there, in the dyeing section. He sent a young man to call him. When I saw my brother arriving, with his uniform stained with different colors, his face more adult than I remembered, I couldn't contain my tears. He stood frozen when he saw me, then ran and hugged me tight. "Alice? What are you doing here? And this boy?" Between sobs, I told him everything, about the marriage, the aggressions, the fear that Ignatius would hurt the child as well. Theodore listened to everything in silence, his face hardening as I spoke. When I finished, he said simply, "You're going to stay with me. That bastard will never touch you again." Mr. Gerald, who had waited outside, smiled when he saw the reunion. Theodore thanked him for helping me, offered to pay for the stay at the boarding house. Mr. Gerald refused. "Helping those in need has no price, young man. Just promise me you'll take good care of your sister and this little boy." That's how I began a new life in Louisville, under my brother's protection. He lived in a simple room in a workers' village near the factory. With our arrival, he managed to exchange it for a slightly larger place. It was still just one room, but there was space for a mattress for me and Oswald on the floor. He slept in a hammock, hung in a corner. Life in Louisville was a difficult new beginning, but away from Ignatius's hands, I felt I could breathe again. Theodore got me a job at the factory canteen, washing dishes and serving meals to the workers. The work was hard. It started at 5 in the morning and ended only after 3 in the afternoon. Oswald stayed at an improvised daycare that the women of the workers' village organized, each taking care of the children on different days. Our days were tight, but there was peace. At night, after Oswald fell asleep, Theodore taught me to read better. I had attended school in Pikeville, but only knew the basics. Gradually, I became truly literate, learning to write letters, to do more complex calculations, to read the old newspapers Theodore brought from the factory. When Oswald turned 5, I managed to enroll him in a small public school near where we lived. He was a bright boy, learned quickly, but had a difficult temperament. He would explode in fits of rage over small annoyances, hit other children. The teacher called me frequently to talk about his behavior. "It's normal," Theodore would say, trying to console me. "The boy went through a lot of trauma, saw things no child should see. With time, he'll improve." But I knew there was something more. Oswald had his father's eyes, not just the color, but that same frightening gleam that appeared when he was angry. Sometimes, looking at him, I saw Ignatius, and a chill ran down my spine. The years passed. Theodore met a girl from the factory, Zena, got married, and moved to his own house. Oswald and I continued in the small room in the village. I got a better job as a sewing assistant in a garment shop. The calloused hands from washing so many dishes in the canteen were now getting used to needles and threads. Oswald grew strong and healthy, but his temperament only worsened. At 9, he was expelled from school for breaking the nose of a classmate who mocked his torn sneakers. I managed to enroll him in another school, farther away, where no one knew him. I lied about the reason for the transfer, said we had moved. At night, I tried to talk to him, to understand what was going on inside that hurt little heart. "Son, you can't solve everything with your fists, understand? The world doesn't work that way." "It worked for my father," he would reply, with a look that chilled my soul. "You were just too weak to fight back." His words cut me like razors. Even so young, he had already absorbed the violence, already thought it was the natural way of things, and worst of all, he blamed me for not having fought against Ignatius. When Oswald turned 12, Ignatius showed up in Louisville. I never knew how he found us after so long. Maybe someone from Pikeville had seen me, passed on information. He appeared at the door of the garment shop where I worked, waiting for me at the exit. Older, thinner, with a face marked by drink, but still with those eyes that made me tremble. "I came to get my son," he said, blocking my path. "You stole him from me, you tramp." The old fear returned, paralyzing me for an instant. But I was no longer that frightened girl. "Get out of here, Ignatius. Oswald isn't going with you. There's nothing of yours here." He advanced, grabbed me by the arm with such force that it left purple marks. "You don't give the orders. I'm going to take my son, and you won't stop me." Luckily, the security guard at the shop saw the scene and came to help. Ignatius was expelled, but not before shouting, "This isn't over. I'll find you again. You'll see." That night, I didn't sleep. I knew Ignatius wouldn't give up easily. The next morning, I sought out my brother Theodore, told him what happened. He suggested that Oswald and I move far away, maybe to another state. He had a friend in the South, in California, who could arrange a job for me at a textile factory in Oceanside. The idea of starting over again, so far away, scared me. But the fear of Ignatius was greater. In 2 weeks, I gathered our few things, said goodbye to Theodore and Zena, and left with Oswald for California. The trip was long and tiring. Oswald, now 12, remained silent most of the time. When I asked if he was sad about leaving Louisville, his school friends, he replied, "I want to meet my real father. You never allowed it." That caught me by surprise. "Son, your father, he's not a good man. He hurt me, hurt you when you were little. We left Pikeville to protect ourselves." "That's your lie," he replied, with anger in his eyes. "You were the one who wasn't good as a wife. That's why he got angry. That's what Grandma Grace told me in the letters." I then discovered that my own mother, who continued in Pikeville, had maintained secret contact with Oswald, passing the address to Ignatius. The betrayal hurt me more than any beating I had ever taken. We arrived in Oceanside on a cold day in June 1979. Theodore's friend, Walter, met us at the bus station. He was a middle-aged man, a widower, quiet but good-hearted. He took us to his house where we would stay until finding our own place. The work at the textile factory was exhausting, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, but it paid better than anything I had ever done before. Oswald was enrolled in a local school, but went unwillingly. He suffered bullying from classmates because of his different accent, simple clothes, for being an outsider. The relationship between us worsened every day. He blamed me for everything, for having left Pikeville, for not having a present father, for being poor. The arguments became increasingly frequent and intense. One day, returning from the factory, I found our room ransacked. The drawers open, clothes on the floor. The money I kept inside an empty jar, hidden behind the wardrobe, was gone, along with Oswald. I searched everywhere, asked the neighbors, his school friends. No one knew where he was. Only the next day, when I received a telegram, did I understand what had happened. "Mom, went to find my father. Don't look for me." In despair took over me. I imagined my son in the hands of that violent man, learning to be like him. I wanted to go after him, but had no money for the trip back to Kentucky. Oswald had taken everything. Walter, seeing my suffering, offered help. "I'll lend you the money for the ticket, but think carefully. Maybe it's better to let the boy discover for himself what kind of man his father is." Part of me knew he was right. Oswald was so full of anger against me that any attempt to bring him back would only make things worse. But a mother's heart bled just thinking of my boy far away, exposed to that harmful influence. I decided to wait. I continued working, saving every penny. I sent letters to Pikeville, to my mother, begging for news of Oswald. The answers, when they came, were dry. "He's fine. He's with his father. Leave them in peace." Months turned into years. The pain of my son's absence never diminished, but I learned to live with it. I continued in Oceanside, working at the factory. Over time, I was promoted to quality supervisor, earning a little better. I managed to rent a simple little house for myself, gathered some furniture, created a routine. In 1985, 6 years after Oswald's escape, I received an unexpected visit. He, now an 18-year-old man, was at the door of my house. Taller than me, with broad shoulders like his father's, but with even harder eyes. He carried a small suitcase and his face marked by a recent bruise on his left eye. "Can I come in?" he asked, without hugging me, without showing any emotion at seeing me after so long. At that moment, all the resentment I might have felt dissolved. It was my son, my boy, coming back to me. I opened my arms, tears flowing freely. "Of course you can, son. This has always been your home, too." He entered, looking around with curiosity, evaluating the simplicity of the furniture, the curtains I had sewn myself, the few ornaments that cheered up the environment. He made no comment. Gradually, through tense conversations and prolonged silences, I understood what had happened. Oswald had found Ignatius in Pikeville, lived with him for a time. In the beginning, everything seemed fine. Ignatius treated him like a king, bought presents, told stories where I was always the villain. But as Oswald grew and began to question certain things, to develop his own opinions, the relationship soured. The same fists that had beaten me so many times turned against the son. The last fight, which resulted in the black eye and the decision to leave, had been about a girlfriend that Ignatius didn't approve of. He said he was going to teach me to be a man, that he would beat her in front of me so I could learn how to treat women, Oswald recounted, with a coldness that frightened me. That's when I hit him first. I caught him off guard, drunk as always. I left him unconscious and came away. Part of me felt relief knowing my son had defended himself, had refused to follow his father's path. Another part trembled realizing that violence continued there, had only changed direction. "You did right to leave, son, and in not hurting the girl. Violence doesn't solve anything, it only brings more pain." He looked at me with those eyes that seemed not to blink. "You're wrong. Violence does solve things, but it has to be used against those who deserve it." At that moment, a chill ran up my spine. But I swallowed my fear, trying to see only the positive. My son was back, away from Ignatius's influence, with the chance to build a better life. The first months of Oswald's return were for adaptation. I arranged a job for him at the textile factory in the machine maintenance section. He had a knack for mechanics, learned quickly. The salary wasn't much, but it helped with household expenses. At night, he frequently went out. He came back late, sometimes smelling of drink, sometimes with marks of fights. When I tried to talk, to show concern, he would get irritated. "You're not my boss. I'm a grown man." In 1987, Oswald met Nancy, a girl who worked in the administrative sector of the factory. She was a pretty young woman, with blonde hair and green eyes, educated, gentle, always smiling. I saw that relationship with hope. Perhaps the love of a good woman could heal the wounds that Oswald carried. They began dating, and Oswald seemed calmer, more centered. He went out less, drank less, even took me to dinner at a simple restaurant on her birthday, the three of us together. It was one of the happiest nights I had in many years. The following year they announced their marriage. Nancy was 2 months pregnant. Oswald seemed genuinely happy with the idea of being a father. We talked about the past, about Ignatius, about the mistakes that shouldn't be repeated. For the first time, I felt he had really understood what I went through, that he no longer blamed me for having fled with him. "Mom," he said, in a rare demonstration of affection, holding my calloused hands between his, "I'm going to be a different father. I'm going to take care of my child as Dad never took care of me. You'll see." The ceremony was simple in the Methodist church that Nancy's family attended. I, as a Baptist, felt a little out of place, but happy to see my son starting a new life, apparently leaving behind the traumas of the past. They rented a little house not far from mine. I helped as I could, knitting clothes for the baby, preparing treats on weekends, giving the advice that every mother-in-law gives, trying not to be too intrusive. In September 1988, my first granddaughter was born, Lena, a beautiful baby with her mother's eyes and the dimple in her chin that Oswald had as a child. Seeing him holding that small and fragile thing, crying with emotion, I was sure that the ghosts had been left behind. My son would be a good father, a good husband. The cycle of violence was broken. How wrong I was. The first years of Lena's life were relatively peaceful. Oswald worked hard, had been promoted to maintenance supervisor at the factory. Nancy left her job to care for their daughter full-time. They moved to a slightly better house with a small yard where Lena could play. I visited them whenever I could, bringing cakes and sweets that I learned to make in the region, like apple pie and cornbread that I learned from the neighbors. Lena grew up strong and intelligent, talkative and curious. She had dark hair like her father's, but her mother's green eyes. She was my ray of sunshine, my joy on weekends. When Lena turned 5, Nancy went back to work. The girl stayed at kindergarten during the day. Gradually, I began to notice changes in my son's behavior. Small things at first: impatience with Nancy over a dinner that took too long, irritation when Lena made too much noise while playing. Nothing serious, nothing that stood out. In 1994, when Lena was 6 years old, Nancy became pregnant again. It was a difficult pregnancy, with lots of morning sickness, high blood pressure, constant rest. Oswald showed less enthusiasm than the first time. "We already have one daughter. Why complicate things?" he would say, not hiding his displeasure. Nancy lost the baby in the 5th month. It was a hard blow for her, who sank into a deep depression. Oswald, instead of supporting her, distanced himself. He began to go out more, to drink on weekends, to come home late. I tried to help as I could, taking care of Lena, cooking, but I lived a few blocks away and worked during the day. On a Sunday afternoon, I visited them without warning. I was bringing a chocolate cake, Lena's favorite. I found Nancy crying in the kitchen with a cut on her lip. When I asked what had happened, she said she had fallen in the bathroom, but her eyes told another story. "It was Oswald, wasn't it?" I asked softly, so that Lena, who was playing in the room, wouldn't hear. Nancy denied it, frightened. "No, Miss Alice, nothing like that. It really was an accident." But I knew that type of accident too well. I had lived through many of them with Ignatius. The ghost I had feared so much was back, only now it was my own son transforming into the monster his father had been. I tried to talk to Oswald that same night when he returned. He denied everything, became furious with my interference. "You mind your own business. Problems between me and my wife are between us," he said, his eyes shining in that way that reminded me so much of Ignatius that it hurt. I left there devastated, but determined not to let history repeat itself. I began to visit more often, to observe, to try to create a relationship of trust with Nancy so she would open up to me. It was difficult. She was ashamed, afraid, didn't want to admit what was happening. Things got worse when, in 1996, the textile factory where we worked went through a restructuring. Many people were laid off, including Oswald. The blow to his pride was enormous. He spent weeks at home, drinking, blaming the world, blaming Nancy, blaming me for having dragged him to Oceanside so many years before. He got another job at a metalworking company, earning less. His mood only worsened. Nancy's falls and accidents became more frequent. Lena, now 8 years old, became increasingly quiet, more withdrawn. On a Saturday morning in March 1997, Nancy appeared at my door. Her eye was so swollen she could barely open it. She brought Lena by the hand, frightened. "I need help, Miss Alice," she said, with a choked voice. "I can't anymore." I took them inside. I prepared tea, tried to calm Lena, who seemed in a state of shock. Nancy, between sobs, told everything. How Oswald had started hitting her right after the loss of the baby. How the situation had worsened with his dismissal. How he blamed her for everything, even for the rainy weather that ruined his weekends. "I'll call the police," I said, determined not to make the same mistake I made with Ignatius, letting the violence continue for years. "No!" Nancy exclaimed in panic. "He'll kill me if I report him. He promised he would do that if I told anyone." The fear in her eyes was real, palpable. I knew that fear. I had lived with it. I knew it wasn't an exaggeration. Men like Ignatius, like Oswald, were capable of fulfilling that kind of threat. "Then let's leave," I suggested. "The three of us, far from here. I know someone in San Diego, an old colleague from the factory who moved there. She can help us start over." We spent the rest of the day planning. Lena would stay with me while Nancy went back to get important documents and some clothes, taking advantage that Oswald would be at a barbecue with colleagues from the metalworking company. We would meet at the bus station late afternoon. The plan seemed perfect. I packed a small suitcase, took my savings hidden inside a rice container, the simple jewelry I had, a pair of earrings, a thin gold chain that I received on my 60th birthday. I was ready to leave everything behind once again to save Nancy and Lena from the same story I had lived. But Nancy never appeared at the bus station. We waited for hours, Lena and I, sitting on those hard plastic benches, looking at each bus that arrived, at each person who entered. Nothing. Night fell, and with it, my heart. "Grandma, isn't Mommy coming?" Lena would ask, her little eyes full of fear. "She must be delayed, my dear. Let's wait a little longer." But deep down, I already knew. Something had gone wrong. Very wrong. I couldn't go home. Oswald might be there, looking for us. I couldn't go to their house for the same reason. We decided to spend the night at a cheap motel near the bus station and the next morning seek help. It was the longest night of my life, consoling Lena who cried calling for her mother, while I myself choked back tears, imagining the worst scenarios. In the morning, we went to the police station. I explained the situation, the aggressions, our escape plan, Nancy's disappearance. The sheriff looked at me with a mixture of boredom and disbelief. "Ma'am, this is a couple's quarrel. Your daughter-in-law probably gave up on going, is at home with her husband, resolving their differences like adults. You'd better do the same, go home and not interfere." I insisted. I talked about the swollen eye, about the death threats. He wrote something on a paper, said he would send a patrol car to check on their house, but that I shouldn't create unnecessary commotion. I left there devastated, but didn't give up. I took Lena to a trusted neighbor's house and went to the metalworking company where Oswald worked. I needed to know if he was there, if he had gone to work normally. He wasn't there. The secretary said he had called saying he wouldn't come, that he had a family problem. Fear turned into panic. I returned to the police station, insisted so much that the sheriff, irritated, finally sent a patrol car to their house. I waited, hoping they would tell me everything was fine, that Nancy was there, alive, that I was imagining the worst needlessly. But when the officer returned, his face said it all. They had found Nancy unconscious with serious injuries. Oswald wasn't in the house. An ambulance had already been called. I ran to the hospital, leaving Lena with the neighbor. Nancy was in the ICU, with head trauma, broken ribs, internal bleeding. The doctors didn't give me much hope. She was brutally beaten, the doctor said, without beating around the bush. If she survives, she may have permanent sequelae. 3 days later, Nancy died without regaining consciousness. I never had the chance to say goodbye, to ask forgiveness for not having acted earlier, for not having saved her as I couldn't save myself so many years ago. Oswald disappeared. The police issued an arrest warrant, but he seemed to have vanished into thin air. I stayed with Lena, who was now officially under my guardianship. The girl almost didn't speak, didn't cry. She was in a state of shock, the doctors said. She would need therapy, lots of love, time to process the terrible trauma. We couldn't continue in Oceanside. There were too many memories, too much pain, and the constant fear that Oswald might reappear. So, in April 1997, I moved with Lena to San Diego, where my ex-colleague from the factory, Diana, helped us start over. I found work as a seamstress in a small garment shop. Lena was enrolled in a new school. I rented a simple little house in a quiet neighborhood. Gradually, we tried to build a new life, away from the ghosts of the past. For 2 years, we had no news of Oswald. Lena, with the help of therapy, began to speak again, to smile sometimes, to play with other children. I thanked God every day for this small improvement, for this chance to start over. Then, on a rainy night in August 1999, the doorbell of our house rang. When I opened the door, my heart almost stopped. It was Oswald, thinner, with an unshaven beard, red eyes, smelling of alcohol. But it was still him, my son, the murderer of his own wife. "I came to see my daughter," he said, trying to enter. I stood in front of the door, blocking the passage. "No, Oswald, you can't come in." "I'm going to call the police." "You're not going to do that," he replied, with a cold smile. "Not against your own son, flesh of your flesh." He was right. Despite everything, my mother's heart still hesitated. But my responsibility to Lena was greater than any feeling. "Go away, Oswald. The police are looking for you. You killed Nancy." His face contorted into an expression of anger. "It was an accident. She fell. I didn't want to hurt her that way." "You beat her until she died," I said, feeling the tears run down. "Like Ignatius did to you, like he did to me. You became just like your father." The mention of Ignatius seemed to hit him like a slap. For an instant, I saw confusion in his eyes, perhaps even regret. But it passed quickly. "Let me see Lena, just a bit. She's my daughter." "No, Oswald. Go away or I'll call the police now." He pushed me hard, making me fall. He entered the house, calling for Lena. Thank God she was in the bedroom, sleeping soundly after a day at school. I ran to the phone, dialed 911 with trembling hands. When the police arrived, Oswald had already fled again. I filed the report, described what happened. The police promised to reinforce the search, but I knew it would be difficult to find him if he didn't want to be found. That night, I didn't sleep. I kept watch over Lena's sleep, a kitchen knife beside me, ready to defend my granddaughter with my life if necessary. In the following days, I hired a man to install bars on the windows, reinforced locks on the doors. I changed our schedules, began to take and pick up Lena at school personally, never leaving her alone for a minute. But you can't live in a constant state of alert forever. Gradually, when months passed without a sign of him, I began to relax a little. Maybe he had realized the risk. Maybe he had gone far away. Maybe. In 2000, I got a better job at a larger garment factory in San Diego. The salary was good, allowed us to move to a slightly better house in a gated community with a doorman. Lena, now 12 years old, seemed to finally overcome the trauma. She had friends at school, brought good grades, smiled more. On a morning in September 2000, I received a call that changed everything again. It was from the sheriff's office in Oceanside. After fleeing our house in San Diego that rainy night in August 1999, Oswald had continued on the run, using false names and hiding in different cities. The sheriff explained that he had been drunk, lost control of his vehicle on a curve in the road, rolled over several times. The license plate of the car wasn't even his, but fingerprints confirmed his identity. They were still in the system because of Nancy's case. This is how my son's escape ended. He spent his last months living like a ghost, without a name, without a home, without a family. The news hit me like a punch in the stomach. Despite everything he had done, he was still my son. I cried for days, hidden from Lena, divided between grief and guilty relief, knowing he would never threaten us again. I didn't tell Lena that her father had died. She believed he was in prison, far away, that he would never come back. I saw no reason to reopen wounds, to make her process another loss. My granddaughter had already suffered enough for several lifetimes. With time, the wound began to heal. We built a quiet life in San Diego. Lena grew strong, intelligent, resilient. I finished raising her alone, with all the love a grandmother can give. We became not only family, but best friends. We talked about everything, except the dark past we were trying to leave behind. In 2004, when Lena turned 16, I met Richard. He was a widower, worked as an accountant at an import company at the port of San Diego. We met at the church I attended. A gentle, educated, respectful man. After so many years alone, caring only for Lena, I allowed myself to open my heart again. Richard and I married in 2005 in a small ceremony. Lena was my maid of honor, beautiful in a light blue dress that I sewed especially for her. We moved to Richard's house, larger and more comfortable than ours. Finally, it seemed that life was giving us a real chance at happiness. The first few months were peaceful. Richard treated Lena as the daughter he never had. She, initially shy with him, soon got used to his gentle presence, his easy laugh, his advice about school and the future. Then gradually, I noticed changes. Lena, who had always been so open with me, began to close herself off. She spent more time in her room, hardly talked during meals. When I asked if everything was okay, she would just answer yes and look away. I thought it was just adolescence, perhaps jealousy because I had married, because I was dividing my attention that before was all hers. I talked with the psychologist who had been seeing her since she was little, who reassured me, saying this phase of distancing was normal, that I should give her space. But my grandmother's heart felt there was something more. Something wrong, very wrong, that I couldn't identify. One night, I woke up in the early hours to a strange noise. It wasn't crying or talking. It was a rhythmic sound, like something scratching or softly tapping. Richard wasn't in bed. Probably had gone to the bathroom, I thought. I got up to check. The noise was coming from Lena's room. I walked down the dark hallway, my heart racing without knowing why. The door to her room was slightly open. I peeked in. The bed was empty. The sound was coming from the large wardrobe that stood in the corner of the room. I approached slowly, confused. Why would Lena be in the wardrobe in the middle of the night? Perhaps sleepwalking. She had never shown this before. I opened the wardrobe door. I pushed aside the clothes hangers. And then I saw. The back of the wardrobe was loose, moved aside, and behind it there was a hole in the wall. A hole that led directly to the next room, Richard's office, which shared a wall with Lena's room. And through the hole, I heard his voice, and my granddaughter's muffled sobs. At that moment, the world stopped spinning. Everything went into slow motion. The horror of what was happening hit me like a ton of bricks. My mind flew to all the times Lena had closed herself off, to the dark circles under her eyes, to the fear in her gaze when Richard entered the room. He had made that hole. Used it to enter her room during the night, to do to my granddaughter what Ignatius had done to me, what Oswald had done to Nancy. The cycle of abuse that I had tried so hard to break was happening again, right under my nose. Something inside me exploded. I was no longer the frightened Alice who fled from Ignatius. I was no longer the mother who failed to protect Nancy from Oswald. I was a grandmother facing the monster that threatened what was most precious to me in the world. Silently, I moved away. I went back to the bedroom, my mind working on a plan. I couldn't confront him at that moment. He could hurt Lena, hurt me, flee before the police arrived. No, I needed to be smart. I waited. I waited until I heard Richard return to our bed, pretending to be asleep. I waited until his snoring became heavy, indicating he was in deep sleep. And then I got up. I went to the linen closet, got the heaviest pillow in the house, the one we kept for guests, and returned to the bedroom. Richard slept on his back, his mouth slightly open, oblivious to what was coming. The senile old lady he thought didn't know anything approached silently. I placed the pillow over his face and pressed with all the strength I could gather. He woke up, tried to fight, his arms flailing, trying to push me away. But anger and desperation gave me a strength I didn't know I had. It took a long time, longer than I imagined. But finally, the snoring stopped, and the silence that came after. It was the first silence of peace that house had had in a very long time. When I was sure it was done, I went to Lena's room. She was sleeping now, exhausted, tears still damp on her face. I caressed her hair gently, so as not to wake her. "Never again, my love," I whispered. "Never again will anyone hurt you." The next morning, I called the police. When they arrived, I showed them the hole in the wall. I told about the abuse, about how I discovered it, about how I protected my granddaughter in the only way I could think of. I denied nothing. They arrested me, of course. There was no other possibility. I was tried and convicted of homicide, with mitigating circumstances due to the situation, but still a long sentence. Because of my age, I was sent to this special facility instead of a regular prison. Lena went to the care of Aunt Diana, my friend who helped us when we arrived in San Diego. The investigations confirmed what I already knew. Richard had abused her for months, using that hole in the wall that he himself had made, threatening to hurt her and me if she told anyone. The first days in prison were the hardest. Not because of the place itself, the gray walls, the bars, the rigid rules, but because of the separation from Lena. My granddaughter, my son, my reason for living was out there while I was in here. The idea of not seeing her grow up, of not being present to protect her, ate at me from the inside. But the system sometimes surprises with small glimpses of humanity. The prosecutor of my case, Dr. Olivia Parker, a serious middle-aged woman with eyes that seemed to see beyond appearances, became interested in my situation. After hearing the whole story, not just the murder of Richard, but the whole chain of abuse that came from Ignatius, passing through Oswald, culminating in Richard, she decided my case deserved special attention. "Miss Alice," she said during a visit to the prison, a few weeks after my conviction, "what you did was wrong in the eyes of the law, but I understand why you did it, and I'll help you as I can." It was she who arranged my transfer to the special facility for elderly people who committed crimes, a less severe place than the regular prison. It was also she who got authorization for Lena to visit me regularly, despite the normal restrictions. Lena. My Lena was under Diana's legal guardianship, as planned. In the beginning, she came to see me once a month, always accompanied by the psychologist. They were difficult encounters, laden with contradictory emotions. She was relieved to be free from Richard, but confused about my action, about being separated from me. A teenager, trying to process traumas that adults would have difficulty handling. During the first visits, we hardly spoke. We would sit side by side, sometimes holding hands, sometimes just looking out the window. Gradually, words began to flow. She told me about school, about friends, about how Diana treated her well. And then, during a visit almost 6 months after the event, she finally talked about that night. "Grandma," she said with a choked voice, eyes fixed on the floor, "I should have told you about the hole in the wall, about what he did." My heart tightened. I took her hands between mine, those hands still so small, so young. "No, my darling, it wasn't your fault. He threatened you, threatened to hurt me. You were just a scared child. But you're here because of me. If I had spoken earlier—" "I'm here because I made a choice," I interrupted gently. "And I would do it again, 1,000 times, if it was to protect you." From that day on, something changed between us. An invisible weight was lifted. Lena began to come more often. Our conversations became lighter. She brought me drawings, then letters, then photos of outings with friends. Life continued out there, and my granddaughter was growing, healing her wounds, moving forward. Meanwhile, inside the prison facility, I also found my way. I began to crochet again, something I hadn't done since the days in Oceanside. My hands, aged and marked by time, found comfort in the repetitive movement of the needles, in creating something beautiful from a simple thread. One of the guards, Miss Christina, noticed my work. "Miss Alice, you have a gift. These pieces are beautiful." It was she who suggested I teach other inmates. Soon, we formed a small group that met 3 times a week in the common room. Elderly women like me, each with her story, her regrets, her ghosts. Crocheting united us, gave us a purpose, a way to pass the time that wasn't just ruminating on the past. The pieces we produced, blankets, scarves, caps, socks, were donated to nurseries and orphanages in the region. Knowing that something made by our hands brought comfort and warmth to needy children alleviated a bit the weight of guilt that we all carried. In the 2nd year of my sentence, Dr. Olivia returned with news that would change everything. After a review of my case, considering the extreme circumstances, my advanced age, and my exemplary behavior in the institution, there was a possibility of sentence reduction. "I'm not promising anything, Miss Alice," she said, always cautious. "But I'll fight for you to spend your last years outside of here, with your granddaughter." It was a long process. Hearings, testimonies, psychological reports. Lena, now 18 years old, testified in my favor, telling in detail what she had suffered at Richard's hands, how I had been her only protection throughout her life. Diana also testified, talking about how she met me, about the dedication I always had for Lena, about how our escape from Oceanside had been an act of protection against Oswald. And then came the most surprising testimony. Theodore, my brother, whom I hadn't seen for more than 15 years, traveled from Louisville to San Diego to speak in my defense. He was already an old man with white hair, his body bent by years of hard work, but with eyes still alive and bright. "My sister," he said before the judge, "has spent her entire life running from violent men, protecting those she loves. First, she fled from the husband who beat her to save her small son. Then, when that same son became like his father, she fled again to save her granddaughter. When the 3rd monster appeared in her life, she had nowhere else to run. She did what she thought she needed to do to protect that girl. If that's a crime, then it's a crime of love." Theodore's words, simple but powerful, moved everyone in the room. Even the judge, usually impassive, needed to remove his glasses and discreetly wipe his eyes. After 3 months of hearings and deliberations, the decision came. My sentence would be reduced, and I would serve the remainder under house arrest with electronic monitoring. I could live with Lena, who now, being of legal age, had a small house of her own, bought with the money from the indemnity she received for the abuse case. The day of my release from the prison facility was sunny, as if even the sky was celebrating. Lena waited for me at the gate, beautiful at 18, her long hair tied in a ponytail, the luminous smile I feared I would never see again. We hugged for so long that the guards had to gently separate us. "Come, Grandma," she said, picking up my small suitcase. "Let's go home." Lena's house was simple but welcoming. 2 bedrooms, a small living room, a kitchen that opened onto a small yard where she had planted sunflowers, my favorite flowers. In my room, a surprise, a wooden loom, new, shining. "For you to continue your crochet," she explained shyly. "Miss Christina told me how much it helped you in there." At that moment, looking at my granddaughter, at the home she had built for us two, I felt a peace I hadn't experienced in decades. The cycle of violence that began with Ignatius, that almost repeated with Oswald and Richard, was finally broken. Lena was safe, and I, despite everything, was there to see her flourish. In the months that followed, we built a new routine together. Lena studied nursing at the local college. She chose the profession inspired by the kind nurses who helped her after the revelation of the abuse. I took care of the house, did my crochet, helped in the volunteer work that Lena did at a nursing home on weekends. My electronic monitoring prevented me from going too far, but that didn't bother me. After a lifetime in motion, fleeing from one place to another, it was a relief to finally be stationary, safe, at peace. Sometimes, on summer nights, we would sit on the small back porch looking at the stars. Lena would tell me about her plans for the future, finishing college, working at the city hospital, maybe one day getting married and having children. Children who would grow up without fear, without violence, without holes in the walls. "You know, Grandma," she said on one of those nights, holding my wrinkled hand. For a long time, I asked myself why everything happened to us. Why Mom had to die. Why Dad was that way. Why Richard. Well, why everything. And I don't have answers. But I know one thing. You broke the cycle. You prevented me from becoming just another victim who could later repeat the story. You saved not only me, but also the children I might one day have. Her words brought tears to my eyes. Maybe she was right. Maybe my story, as painful as it was, had served something greater, to break a chain of pain that could have continued for generations. And as we looked together at the starry sky of San Diego, I silently thanked for every step of the way, even the most painful ones that brought me there. To that perfect moment of peace, with my granddaughter at my side, free from fear, full of hope for the future. Today, at 76 years old, I live a quiet life here in Oceanside. It's been almost 6 years since I left the prison facility, and even with the electronic monitoring on my ankle, I found a peace I never imagined possible in life. Our little house is simple, but it's a real home. Lena graduated in nursing and works at St. Teresa Hospital, right here in Oceanside. Seeing my granddaughter in a white uniform, healing visible and invisible wounds, fills me with a pride that barely fits in my chest. My routine is calm, as befits a lady my age. I still wake up with the roosters, as my mother used to say back in Pikeville. In the morning, I take care of the house and do my crochet, which I sell to a little shop downtown. It's not much money, but it gives me satisfaction. Twice a week, I receive a visit from the social worker, Miss Nadine, who checks if I'm fulfilling the conditions of my parole. With time, these visits have almost turned into friends' meetings. "You're my success case," she always says. I don't feel like an example of anything. I just did what needed to be done to protect those I loved. But I'm happy that the system, at least in this case, worked as it should. Lena, my greatest pride, blossoms every day. At 24, she has already earned respect at the hospital and is specializing in pediatric care. She wants to help children so that none suffer what she suffered. A year ago, she met Andrew, a young resident doctor. He's a gentle, respectful young man with a soft voice and sincere eyes. I confess that at first I was apprehensive. The fear that history would repeat itself, that another violent man would enter our lives, was still there, like a shadow. But Andrew is not like Ignatius, not like Oswald, not like Richard. He treats Lena with the respect she deserves. "Miss Alice," he told me one night, "I know part of your story. Lena told me. I want you to know that I admire you very much for what you did to protect her. And I promise that I will always take care of her, respect her, honor her as she deserves." His words moved me deeply. Perhaps finally the wheel had really stopped turning. Perhaps Lena had found what I never could, a true love, without fear. I still have nightmares, you know? I wake up sweaty, with my heart racing, hearing again those muffled sobs, seeing that cursed hole in the wall. But then I look out the window, see the lights of Oceanside, take a deep breath, and remember that everything is fine now. That I managed to protect my little granddaughter, even if the price was high. The scars remain, there's no use pretending they don't. But I've learned to live with them, to accept that they are part of my story. When I look back, to the frightened girl who fled from Ignatius, to the desperate mother who tried to save Nancy, to the grandmother who did the unthinkable to protect Lena, I see a continuous line of struggle and survival. I know my time on this earth isn't infinite, At 76 years old, and with health weakened by so much suffering, each day is a gift. My greatest joy is knowing that, when I depart, I will leave Lena well, safe, loved. That the violence that marked so many generations of my family stopped with me. That my granddaughter will live a life without fear, without holes in the walls. And I would do it all again, without hesitating a second, to protect my Lena. Because a grandmother's love is the most powerful force I've ever felt. It's what gives me peace, even with the weight of the past, even with the memories that sometimes still haunt me on the darkest nights. My dear ones who have listened to me until now, I want to say a few words from the bottom of the heart of this old woman who has lived so much. If you are going through a situation like what I went through, know that you are not alone. No matter where you are, there are people ready to help, hands extended, waiting for you to hold them. Silence only protects the abusers. When I kept quiet about Ignatius's abuse, I only gave him strength. When I didn't notice the signs of what Richard was doing to Lena, I allowed evil to continue. Speaking up is difficult, it's frightening, but it's the first step to breaking the chains. You might think, but no one will believe me, or, it's dangerous, he'll hurt me more. I know how that fear is, I lived with it for years. But today I know there is always a way out, even when it seems we are cornered. In the darkest moments of my life, I found strength thinking of those I loved. Love was my fuel, my light in the darkness. Find yours. It can be any loved one, or even love for yourself, for that future you deserve to live without fear. Violence leaves scars, that's true. I carry mine on my body and soul. But scars are also marks of healing. They show where we were wounded, but prove that we survived, that the wound closed, that we moved forward. If you're listening to this and identify with my story, you are stronger than you think, more resilient than you imagine, braver than you believe, and you deserve a life of peace, of respect, of true love, not that distorted semblance that comes with fists and shouts. Anywhere in the world, seek help. Look for authorities, organizations that protect victims, trusted people. Use the internet to find information about how to protect yourself, a tool I didn't have in my time. And if you know someone who is suffering, extend your hand. Sometimes all a person in an abusive situation needs is to know they're not alone, that someone believes them, that there's a safe place to go. Be that someone. My story has pain, blood, tears. It has impossible choices and moments of despair. But it also has overcoming. It has new beginnings. In the end, it has a peace that I won hard. And if I, a simple woman from rural Kentucky with little education and many scars, managed to find my way out of darkness, you can too. And you, my dear ones who have accompanied me until here, before you leave, do this grandmother a favor. Click the subscribe button and activate the bell. By doing this, you help this story reach other people who might be going through the same thing, who need to hear that there is hope. When you subscribe, you're extending a hand to someone who may be suffering in silence at this very moment. And leave in the comments the word freedom, so I know who watched until the end. That word which I took so long to understand, which I fought so hard to conquer. Do this now, don't wait one more minute. Your subscription could be the light someone is looking for in the darkness. Thank you for listening to me, for allowing me to share my pain and my redemption. May the cycle of violence stop with you, as it stopped with me. May your walls always be whole, without hidden holes. May your home be a place of love, of respect, of peace. That's the greatest blessing I can wish for you.